You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And each and every week I thank all of you. And I thank all of you because our listeners are growing each and every day. We grow organically, no advertising. It's just because of you sharing our podcasts and particular shows with family and friends. And I just want to thank you. So many of you listen to the show a lot of different ways to do that. You can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Many of you go to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So thank you for that. Keep sharing with others. A lot of great information. And I know why you're sharing and I know why you're listening is because we have great guests. And not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Mary Fleet, who's a PhD, is a keen observer of what it means to be an aging adult and offers her unique perspective on embracing the shift that aging brings. She is passionate and engaging speaker on all things related to aging and is known for her unique ability to bring humor and compassion to complex and emotionally challenging topics. She published a 3-book series called Aging with Finesse in 2021, containing selections of blogs she has been writing since 2018, and we'll tell you more about that shortly. She offers retirement coaching services along with workshops, courses, and seminars on aging. She lives in Sonoma Valley, California. After over 30 years of working with elders as a licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Mary now offers consultation on how to age in place, how to manage life transitions, and how to adapt to the changes life presents as we age. So, Mary, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Frank, lovely to be here with you. May I just start off with a small minor correction? It's been the bane of my existence, but my last name is pronounced Flett.
Flett.
People, I'm neither the Navy or the enema.
Got it. That's good. That's great. Well, good. Well, thank you for joining us and thank you for clarifying that. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to start out asking you something that's kind of my, I'll call it my area of expertise, and that's, senior living. All right. As you know, I've been in the industry for a while, and though I've been involved in various aspects of it, it seems like that's, it's an important area, and certainly there's challenges with that. And I just want to get your comment, a kind of overall comment on, the housing challenges for seniors across the board. I'm sure you deal with it and talk to families all the time. I'd like to get your perspective.
One of the things that has always been amazing to me is how we have, as a culture and a society, assumed that we are going to continue to live in the same place until we choose not to. And in my work life as a psychologist, I can't tell you how much time I spent working with families who had to make a decision at the last moment on where to put mom or dad. Now, that was my professional life. It really didn't come home to me until I had to deal with this with my own mother. And I have to tell you what I learned from it, although it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, was that this is a conversation that has to start early and be held often. My tagline is confront the difficult while it's still easy. What I know to be true is at this moment in time, there are fewer and fewer opportunities for people to move places. That has to do with a lot of different things. One is climate change. I live on the West Coast. We have challenges now. We have a whole new season called fire season. Friends of mine who live in Florida have hurricane season. People who live in the upper Midwest and the East now have winters that last for, seems like, epochs. So one of the considerations, much as important as knowing what the meal plan is and what the floor plan is are you going to be able to actually stay there? The industry that is out there was built in the 60s and the 70s. You know this very well. The units, wonderful units, Del Webb, the villages, are aging. Unfortunately, or well, maybe I shouldn't say unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that those who are occupying this space right now are living way longer than anybody expected. And so the waiting line to get into smaller and smaller numbers of available units is growing. We're at a point of absolute need to come up with really creative solutions. The need comes not just from people who are unhoused or who have economic challenges, but the need comes for the fact that socially, societally, and our generation is probably the banner holder for all of this. We need to take care of each other.
Right.
If we're to have people who are independently living, who are solo agers, who may not have children of their own, there are just cascading challenges that we're going to have to come up with solutions for.
Yeah. So, when it's still somewhat of a challenge today, but I want to get your perspective on it. But when I broke out into the business, the term nursing home, which is really, old folks home, nursing home, those terms that were used that are more skilled nursing facilities as we know of them today, that population, that older population, thought if they weren't living at home and they had to go into some sort of senior housing with some care, it was going to be nursing. And we know that there's that in-between stage, which is called assisted living or, retirement living, et cetera. So do you think that we're past that? Do you think that that now people really understand that, or do they still feel like if they're going to make a move and they need care, they must be going into nursing, so they're going to fight it? They, meaning the older population, they don't want to move because they're not going to nursing. All right. Do you think that we're past that now or no?
Oh, heavens no.
Yeah.
And I say that because when we're still using language like the older population, I am the older population.
Right. Yeah, I am too.
Okay? And so, my experience has been that we go through 4 stages. We stay in our home, we raise our family, then we downsize. Okay, so that's the first change. Sometimes downsizing looks like moving into a 55 and older community or a condo or closer to the children. And if we don't have children, maybe it's in the same community, but to an apartment or something like that. The second downsize comes about when our health conditions start to create more challenges for us. And that is right now absolutely channeled by Medicare, by what we can afford to deal with. So if you can afford to pay $3,000, $4,000, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month to move into a smaller place that has, as part of its package, caregiving, nursing, the CCRC models, and I'm assuming your listeners know that that's a continuing care model. If you can afford that, then you are expected and hoped for to pass systematically from independent to assisted and then into continuing care. Okay. Mm-hmm. Nursing, when it first came out in the 1960s, was a solution to a problem for many communities where we no longer had families living generationally in a community that could support them. With the rise of skilled nursing, we also had this. Remember, this is when LBJ was coming up with the Great Society. This was a political response to a financial need of people who were suffering because they didn't have health care and they didn't have anywhere to live. Well, that was back in the 1960s. These issues are still with us. What we came up with then worked for a while. Again, from personal experience, I remember in the small town where my grandfather was in his 80s, he had to go into the hospital. He had a stroke. He was stepped down into a brand new facility. This community was so excited. We had a nursing home. I was in high school at the time. I remember going over there. It was bright and shiny. The nurses wore uniforms and people were clean and happy. And it's nothing like what we talk about today. Now, professionally, I have staffed skilled nursing facilities, and they range from places that really do have sufficient care and providers to places that are run as a business, not as a healthcare facility, but as a business. And here's where I see the biggest problem, which is a roundabout way of answering your question here, is we are having to face up to this competition between how do we pay for the care that human beings deserve to live with dignity as they age, when the only way we have of funding that is through taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how political you want to get, but we can get.
Well, no, right. But I think that, I think that is part of the problem, is that there's this perception for years that, I mean, every day we have to explain to families the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. We have to explain on a daily basis to families that most senior living is private pay. And until they start reaching that point, they just never knew it because they never wanted to think about it. They figured, government, will pay for this because I'm older, because they think, well, they're paying for Medicare, right? So I'm going to turn 65. I'm going to get this nice health insurance and everything else. It's just a perception. It's never been. Even in the countries like Canada and other areas, there's this perception of that the government pays for all this. Guess what? They don't. They don't pay for long-term care. They pay for care, but not the living part of the long-term care. So I think it's certainly an issue, and I'm hoping this generation, the boomer generation, as they age, hopefully they have realized it and are doing a better job preparing for that. I don't know. I don't think that's the case, but I hope, because people, it's expensive. It is expensive, and so anyway, it's certainly very challenging. That's for sure. And then, if people that can't afford it, then you have the kids who maybe the adult children or a spouse who's maybe then they're staying at home caring for that person. And you use an interesting term, which I think this is what you mean, that, human doing versus human, being, transitioning from human doing to human being. I think that's what you mean by that, right?
Absolutely. When we look at how we are raised from our earliest time in school and in childhood, we're given reinforcement for behaviors that support this doingness. What do you do for a living? How do you, those are the questions we ask people. What do you do? So then retirement comes, and retirement was this really arbitrarily chosen number from back in the 1800s, when the lifespan was, on a good day, maybe 68, right. We chose 65. It truly, the story behind why retirement age is 65 in the United States, we could do a whole podcast on that because it's so fascinating, but it's 65. Yeah. Okay, well, when it was chosen, and when it was 65, like I said, the lifespan was very limited. Now it's 82. So when you stop doing, according to our culture and our society, when you step down from your job, now what are you doing? Well, I play golf. Well, I travel. Well, I volunteer. Well, and that lasts for about 5 to 7 years, depending on how much money you have and how physically able you are to do it. What do you do then? And one of my passions at this point in life is about helping people transition from this I am a human doer, producing things, to what is your usefulness quotient? And usefulness is this transition to human being. How do I contribute? I can contribute to my family. I can contribute to my community. I can contribute to my own internal spiritual expansion. What is my usefulness? Now, our society doesn't see much use for older people. Back in the day, Bill Thompson, brilliant man, came out, one of his early books in the 1980s. What are old people for? Well, he answers the question by saying, we're here to share our experience and wisdom. Well, that's great. And that sounds really, really romantic. What if nobody cares about our wisdom or our experience? And I think this is particularly of note for boomers. We have always been on the cutting edge of change. I have taken back, I don't know how many times, the statement that I don't trust anybody over 30. I trust us. What I'm trying to do in my own work in a small way in my community level, but also through my writing and through my workshops and through my work with individuals, is to make sure they understand that what they have to share of the life they have led can make a difference in so many ways, in so many lives. But we have to speak up. We have to say something. We cannot wait for somebody to do something for us. We really do need to take charge. That's challenging. And I have to look in the mirror every day because people who are in elected positions are of my generation. And we don't seem to be doing a whole lot, at least the way I think things should be done. But then again, they haven't asked me yet.
Well, let me ask you this. How do we fix the issue, the problem of ageism today? And maybe explain to our audience, I think most know what it is, but explain what ageism is. I don't want to assume everybody knows, but maybe you could address what I think is just a huge problem in our society.
There's so many wonderful writers responding to this. Of course, names escape me at the moment, but Applewhite is one of them. She has a wonderful book out called As the Chair Rocks. And Ashton Applewhite, she talks about this. Bill Thomas talks about this. It is a belief. What is ageism? It is a belief that age is not valuable. We see it subtly and this is owning it for ourselves, in how we actually language the words we use to describe ourselves. The term in the business is senior housing. Well, I'm sorry, I graduated already. I am no longer a senior. I graduated when I was in high school as a senior. I graduated as a senior. My next graduation, they're going to be playing a funeral march. Okay. I hate that term. Okay. I hate being called Miss. I'm a doctor. Not that you would know that. I don't wear that, but it is a title that I earned and worked hard for. If you call me honey when I walk into the doctor's office, I am offended. We belittle, demean, we make fun of ourselves. There's all kinds of things going on recently about gray hair and whether or not we should be using, I think of Jane Fonda and all of the other quote unquote old stars who are out there. They're incredibly wonderful, rich resources of how do we face the challenges as we grow older. And those challenges are not all that different from what our parents faced.
Right. Yeah. So these terms that are used today, and I'm guilty of it too, because I don't know if we've come up, unless you have come up with a term that somebody who is getting older and they want to refer to them in a certain category, do we just not refer to them in any category, or what's the term we should be using?
How about their name?
Yeah, right.
How about, the invitation here is to lump us into categories, because that's easier than confronting what may be really uncomfortable. Maybe the person sitting across from me doesn't remember who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of a sudden they become older and demented. The fact that demented is used as a verb as opposed to
Right.
someone with memory loss,
Right. I agree with that
a lot
totally.
about what's going on.
Yeah.
So if I am going to talk about a general population, I really do. I'm laughing about this because gerontology has not helped us. They started off with the old, the older old, and the oldest old. And then we graduated. We now have a fourth category. The oldest old. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
Aging adult, aging. I really try and use people's names. And I don't mean to be avoiding this question. It is something I think we have to grapple with.
Right. Good. So we're going to take a real quick break. I promise. When we come back, I want you to tell people a little bit more about your book, and then I got some other points we want to talk about. Just trying to live the healthiest life we can with the time we have remaining. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So today's show is sponsored by Senior Care Authority, a senior placement and elder care consulting organization that has a national network of professionally trained and experienced local advisors to assist families in determining the right path for your loved ones. They'll discuss various long-term care options, whether it's in-home care, assisted living, memory care, or if you just need an advocate to get advice from, a local Senior Care Authority advisor can help you now. So for a free 30-minute consultation with an advisor in your area, contact Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231 or go to www.seniorcareauthority.com and you can find an advisor in your area. We're back with Mary Flett, who has published a 3-book series called Aging with Finesse. And let's talk about that, Mary. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I've always been a writer, and what I found, especially during COVID, was that I had more time to write. And I started off writing huge tomes where I was going to inform professionals about how to work with aging adults. And what I found was that I got more out of just sharing a shorter version of what my thoughts were about a particular issue on a particular day. I publish weekly. I started doing this back when in 2018. And what I have found is 2 things. One, I really enjoy writing. And I think there are many of us who are aging adults who find writing as a means of capturing so much in our lives. And it's very useful. Excuse me here a second. What I have also learned is that I make a commitment to writing on a weekly basis. This gives me usefulness, purpose. I have made a covenant with my readers, and honestly, I don't know how many. I hope there are thousands of them, but there may only be 5 or 6. But I want to be there for them every week, and that gives me something to do, something to organize around, and something to put together. When I looked at the blogs over all of this time, there were themes. And one of the themes was about valuing ourselves and others as we age. And so I pulled together, that's one of the books. One of them is how to connect with others. And this has been a big challenge, I think. So many of us, as we grow old, lose connections. And COVID was one of the things that really exacerbated this problem. We saw this all the way down from nursing homes, where people who were isolated because they had to be isolated to be safe really suffered psychologically as well as physically. But those of us who were able to age at home, I think there were really 2 different groups here, and I wrote about this. There were those of us who were much more introverted and actually were able to breathe, say, thank God I don't have to go out, I don't have to do any activities, I don't have to be traveling, there's nothing, I can just relax and breathe. And then there were those who found that external connection and stimulation was essential to not just their quality of life, but their ability to love themselves and be loved by others. I don't use those words lightly. One of the things that happens as we age and as we disconnect from the culture at large is we lose these feelings of appreciation and being valued by others. You know, when you look back to other cultures, or even in our own history where there were intergenerational families living together, Bumi or Nona or somebody was in the home and you knew when you came in. Abuela would take you in and, you know, wipe your face off and hold you closely and feed you. God, we wouldn't have eaten without any of these wonderful grandmothers and such. Nowadays, the connecting is done electronically. And, you know, honestly, I started with computers back in the 1970s. I don't find a huge burden of technology. I've enjoyed connecting with others over technology, but there are people who don't have access or can't afford the equipment, or who do because of cognitive challenges or even neuropathy, can't, you know, use the keys and all the rest of that. So for them, the ability to stay connected was problematic. The third book is one about just how to actually work this period of life, you know, so the skills and talents and ways of being in the world in a world that really doesn't value aging, where we have to kind of create our own, we have to navigate ourselves. So I don't know, it was kind of a vague running around there.
No,
But
that's great. Well, how do people, how would people get to that blog or get the books?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a website where there's any sorts of wonderful things you can do. So it's drmaryflett.com, all one word. And on there, you find links to my workshops. You'll find links to my Amazon webpage, and you can buy the books there. And if you're interested in doing some coaching, I also have a coaching practice where I can work with you on moving through this period of time.
Great. So speaking about that, what, you know, advice that you give to people as far as they get to that stage in life where maybe they're fortunate enough that they, or they, whether it's fortunate, they just plan for retirement. They're not going to be working in a quote job anymore. And maybe they get a little lost, you know, I mean, you brought up about, you know, the work that you know, you're doing, which I think is great. Any suggestions that you could give to our listeners on just how they can be more useful as they age?
Absolutely. The first thing is to just remember that you are valuable. And take an inventory of these things. What is it that brings you a sense of accomplishment at this point in your life? It isn't so much about doing as just recognizing that there is something I have that is of value, and then finding that place or that person who you can share that with. I've seen this in three different areas. One especially poignant area is in intergenerational sharing. I've seen this with elders who are able to share their love of gardening, for example, with young people who may not understand anything about nutrition or gardening. But when you get young people together with older people in the dirt, my God, everybody plays. I've seen this with mentors being able to give a sense of hope that there will be a future, because that's what we really represent. You know, we are absolute evidence that we can get through this mess that we are in. Oftentimes, individually, we may not realize just how powerful that is. There are so many children today who are experiencing disconnection and distress. We hear about this every day about the depression in young kids. I have to tell you, one way to address that depression is through connection. So if you are someone who has access to a cell phone or a computer, And you can find a way to mentor or even just listen to younger people if you don't have them in your life. That's a way of being useful. Another way of being useful is volunteering. And there are any number of ways to volunteer, from smallest thing of writing postcards if you're politically connected or interested in politics, to local senior centers or schools. I have a friend of mine who's 82 years old, and she's so excited right now because she went to the local school board and she just filled out all of her paperwork, and she's going to be a substitute teacher.
Wow, that's great.
I know. I said, seriously, you want to go back into the classroom? I didn't understand that. And the way I do things is just really finding a need and filling it. And sometimes that is frustrating because not everybody wants, as I said, what we have to offer. So persistence and finding that thing in yourself that gives you that's why I write a blog. That gives me a great deal of joy, and I get to share it with people, and it does meet a need.
Great. Dr. Mary, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I got another minute. Any just words of wisdom to our listeners at all before we sign off?
Yeah, my last parting thought with you is give yourself a break and share what it is that you know with someone today. We don't have tomorrow. It isn't guaranteed. I know it sounds like a meme, but the most important thing you can do is in valuing yourself, share that with others and connect with others. You will make a difference in your world, and you will feel better for yourself.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please be safe out there. And we will talk to everybody next week. Thank you all.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.